Good evening and welcome to the February 24th, 2025 City Council meeting. I am Mayor Ross. Tonight's meeting is brought to you live using video conferencing technology provided by Zoom. Tonight's recording will be posted on the city's YouTube channel. So welcome to everyone and thank you for joining us. Deputy City Clerk Garrett, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Benson,
Here.
Councilmember Watton,
Here.
Councilmember Holloway,
Here.
Councilmember Washington,
Here.
Councilmember Cotton. Here. Councilmember Christensen, and Councilmember Johnson.
Here.
Mayor Ross.
And Mayor Ross.
I am here. Councilor Christensen has requested to be excused. Is there a motion to excuse
So
Councilor?
moved.
Second.
Been moved by Councilor Benson and second by Councilor Watton. No, Mayor Pro Tem Holloway. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? And it's unanimous, and Councilor Christensen is excused. Council, please stand and join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance, and Councilor Johnson, would you please lead the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We now move to our first item, regular business is to approve the agenda. Council may have a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Holloway and second by Councilor Cotton. Is there any discussion? Mayor Pro Tem Holloway?
Down in the executive sessions, we're actually going to have 4 executive sessions, I believe, tonight. But
That's
there
correct.
may be action after the first one, so I would like to add Agenda Bill 25038 after the first executive session.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Holloway and second by Councilor Washington to add Agenda Bill 25-038 following the first executive session. Is there any discussion regarding that? Seeing none, all in favor of that motion, please say aye. Any opposed, nay? It's unanimous, and we will add that agenda bill. Is there any, going back to the original motion, is there any, anything else? Councilor Washington? Oh, Councilor Cotton.
I noticed that the discussion on the utility rate study is been listed under F&A when it's coming out of Parks and Public Works. Can we move that up under Parks and Public Works?
Let's see, where was it?
So motion to move race discussion from F&A to be under Parks and Public Works. May I have a second?
Second.
Move. But you brought, well, that's your motion though.
The motion came from Holloway technically.
Okay, so it's been, Councilor Cotton brought up the motion to move utility rate study from Finance Administration to Parks and Public Works, but the first motion was by then Mayor Pro Tem Holloway and second by Councilman, which one? Councilmember Johnson. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? And so that is approved to move it under Parks and Public Works. Is there any other comments or discussion regarding the agenda? Okay, going for vote for the overall agenda. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? And it is approved with the different amendments. Thank you. Okay. Next item is provide time for residents to comment on items that are not on the agenda. And there will not be online public comments. Written comments are encouraged and may be submitted in person, mail, or email to cityclerk@snoqualmiewad.gov. And before I open it for public comment, is there anyone in City Council that wishes to have public comment? If so, raise your hand. Okay. Seeing none, public comment is now closed. And we move to the consent agenda, which contains approve the City Council meeting minutes dated February 10th, 2025, AB 25-034, which is Water Reclamation Facility Phase 3 Improvement Project Update and Contract Change Order Number 2, and AB 25-037 Railroad Crossing Improvement Design Engineering Contract. All those in favor say aye. Oh, sorry. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Holloway, second by Councilor Cotton. Is there any discussion? Seeing none. And is there any public comment regarding the consent agenda? Seeing none. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, nay? And motion passes unanimous, and the consent agenda is approved. The first ordinance this evening is AB 25-025, City Hall hours. This is the second reading of ordinance 1304. Mayor Pro Tem Holloway, would you please read the introduction and motion?
Introduction, the city council of Snoqualmie finds that the existing city hall hours need to be modified. Okay. Where'd the action go? Move to approve ordinance 1304, amending Snoqualmie Municipal Code, section 2.02.010, relating to city hall hours. May I have a second?
Second.
Been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Holloway and second by Councilor Washington. Is there any public comment regarding the City Hall hours? Seeing none, is there any discussion, council? Seeing none, all those that approve, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? And it's unanimous, and it approving the AB 25-025, which is related to City Hall hours. Next ordinance is AB 25-026, Code Enforcement and Nuisance Abatement, Cost Recoupment, and Process Clarifications. This is the second reading of ordinance 1305. Councilor Washington, would you please read the introduction and motion?
Yes, introduction. These amendments to titles 8, 13, 15, and 17 would give the city greater opportunities to recoup costs incurred in pursuing code enforcement actions and better align the process of issuing and appealing code violations and abatement notices, as well as clarifying the penalties and enforcement mechanisms that apply to water, sewer, stormwater, and zoning code violations. I'll go down and read the proposed motion. So the proposed motion this evening, adopt ordinance 1305, amending the Snoqualmie Municipal Code, titles 8, 13, 15, and 17, to enable recoupment of city costs for code enforcements and nuisance abatements related to water, sewer, stormwater, and zoning regulations, and harmonize and clarify the appeal processes and penalties for code enforcement and nuisance abatement actions. This is the second and final reading this evening.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Councilor Washington and second by Mayor Pro Tem Holloway for AB 25-026. Is there any public comment regarding this item? Seeing none. Councilor, is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those that approve, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? And it is unanimous to approve the code enforcement nuisance abatement, cost recoupment, and process clarifications. So move on to committee reports. The first committee report is for Public Safety Committee. Fire Department fourth quarter 2024 accreditation report. This item is information only and is provided in your packet for your review. Next item is AB 25-015, Resolution 1708, approving the 2024 Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan update. Councilor Vaughn, would you please read the introduction and motion?
All right. The City of Snoqualmie Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan, CEMP, is for use by city and public officials in providing emergency management proceeding during and following a disaster. It gives the policies, information, recommendations, and guidance necessary for officials making operational decisions. And with that, we have Chief Bailey. Good evening, sir.
Is that a motion?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That was your motion?
Is there?
I don't see a motion.
There's not.
It's up at the top.
Oh.
They've moved it.
Oh,
Right after.
thank you very much. Yes, there is. I move to approve Resolution 1708, adopting the Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan and authorizing the mayor to sign.
Is this one a different format?
Second.
too?
So it's been
Yeah,
moved by
this is new
Counselor
format.
Watton and second by Mayor Pro
It's a
Tem
new
Holloway.
format.
Is there any public comment regarding this before we get into the presentation? Seeing none, we have our Fire Chief Mike Bailey, who is here to provide a presentation on the CEMP.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to speak on this motion and this program that was put together, the CEMP. So just to give the whole council a brief update on how we got to this point, the city has had a CEMP. It expired in 2024. The state requires a full rewrite or a full exploration every 5 years. And so that's what we've been working on the last 2 years, is to update fully update the one that we had previously. So that's where we are here today. Just a little bit about it. We already talked about what the reasoning is, why we have a comprehensive emergency management plan. And really, it provides the framework for how we're going to operate in an emergency. And what I want to point out about this plan is it's a living document. Although, the state requires it to be rewritten every 5 years, and they approve it and say that it's good to go, it meets all regulations. It's meant to be a document that's updated and changed as you move along. So each year you look at it, you make revisions at the end of the year, and you keep moving throughout the year. And then at the end of the 5 years, you look at the document as a whole. So this, it's meant to be a living document. As you exercise it, things change in the city. You find better ways to do things. So that's the intention of this, is that it'll be continually at the end of each year, revisions will be made, it'll be tracked. And so that'll be easier to fully update at the end of the 5 years. So as you can see, it was in your packet. It's a large document, 150 pages. We're not going to sit here and go over all 150 pages tonight.
Why not?
But what I did want to do is I wanted to, because there's a lot of information there. Some of it is state regulations. Some of it is really for the operational staff here in the city, how we're going to operate in the EOC. And it's kind of a Bible for us to follow. But there are some things that I wanted to point out, just some of the work that, that the fire department and the emergency management were together. I'm in charge of both. What we've been working on and some of the things that we're working on for the next year, just to kind of highlight what emergency management is in the city. So there was 3 things that I wanted to highlight that kind of either came out of the process of revising this CEMP, or just in general that I would like to pass on to the council to let them know what we're focusing on with emergency management for the next year. The first one I wanted to talk about, things that we'll be focusing on in 2025, is training. As you know, lots of faces have changed in the city. There's lots of new staff in different positions. And so thankfully, knock on the wood here, we haven't had to use our EOC in a couple years. Good that we haven't had to use it, but we also haven't had many exercises or a chance to practice it because of the staff turnover. So really in 2025, we're focusing on training. Not only training the staff up, the directors, the supervisors, but all the staff in the city. So some of the things we're looking at is I have 4 trainings planned throughout the year. The first one will be here in another month at the end of March, beginning of April. And that's just to bring all the directors and the supervisors into the EOC to show them what it is. Most of them have never even seen it inside the fire station. So it's really just an introductory to what it is, how it operates. We're including the directors and also the supervisors, because they also might be filling in roles in the EOC or filling in for a director that's not available. The second training, we're going to look at responsibilities, roles and responsibilities, making sure all the new staff is assured of what they are that they're going to be working on, what they might have to do in an emergency, and what's the responsibility of their department in an emergency. The next quarter, we're going to be working on just a staff or a department head tabletop. And we're going to sit down and we're going to work our way through a flood exercise. Just in paper, sitting around the table, talking about all the things that need to happen leading up to a flood. And then the last thing we're going to do in the last quarter of the year is we're going to have a full city exercise. We're going to open up the EOC. We're going to run through a full scenario, inviting partners and all those around us, and really exercise exactly how we would have to work in an emergency. So those are the 4 trainings I'm planning in the EOC this year. And then also besides that, city staff is going to be working hard on some of their individual trainings. City Administrator Chambliss has directed all the city staff, not just the directors, department heads and the supervisors, but everybody in the city to have ICS 100, 200, 700, and 800, which are all required classes that you need to have. Goes over the incident command system and then how NIMS and how you would operate in emergencies. So all city staff are doing those classes this year. And then as well as department heads and supervisors, we're gonna have ICS 300 and 400, which is both intermediate and advanced ICS. Those are required to have, staff are required to have that to work in the EOC. We're actually bringing those classes to the city in the spring and in the fall to help the department heads and all the directors get those classes. So that's something else that we're working on to try and make sure that everybody in the city is trained up to where they need to be for an emergency. The second thing that we're working on emergency management wise is we're really going to focus on external relationships. Although I've been in the EOC, I've operated the EOC before, now that I'm in charge, and it's been, like I said, it's been a couple years since we've really exercised the EOC, really since COVID. We really want to focus on external relationships, and that's with working with our external partners here in the city that we need to work with in case of emergencies. Just an example of that would be some of the agencies like North Bend's EOC, King County EOC, which is operated down in Renton. Working, I've already been taking some classes with them, working in their EOC, being familiar with their operations. The school district, Snoqualmie Valley Hospital, the electric company, PSE Tanner, our local businesses. Actually tomorrow, or take that back, on Wednesday, I'll be speaking in front of the chamber, talking to the local businesses about emergency preparedness in conjunction with somebody from the city of North Bend and also from the state in regards to emergency preparedness. And then also we want to make sure we have those external partners with our community organizations, the Ridge, ROA, the Reclaim Shelter across the street. Some of those community organizations that we'll be working with in cases of emergencies, we want to make sure that we have those connections also and just really strengthen those ties. And then lastly, that's kind of related to that, is we want to focus on our CERT team. We haven't been able to have a CERT class in a little bit just because we lost our main instructor. And then our new instructor, who is actually one of our volunteers, he's Tom Walker. He's retired from responding on calls, but he is now going to be in charge of our CERT program. He's actually taken a class from FEMA to be a CERT manager, and he's going to run our program for us. And where we not only are we wanting to get more people going through the class, but really we want to focus on bringing in those that have taken the class before, bring those back into the fold, because we know how it's happened in the past. They've taken the class, they've gotten a little backpack, and they put it on their shelf and they forgot about it. And they haven't really been exercised. So we want to bring those people back into the fold. We're going to actually, I believe in April or May, he's going to hold a focus group of those individuals, bring them in, talk about training. And then we're going to make sure that we have, like annual or semi-annual training where they, not only for the people that are starting the class new, but utilizing these people that have already gone through the class to get them re-engaged, get them re-involved, and make sure that they're ready in case we need them. Not only in an emergency, but they also could be another resource from the city personnel if we need them for, any kind of where we need a large group of people answering phones or doing things in emergency. That CERT group can be part of that. So that's part of those external relationships we really want to get working on. The last thing that we're focusing on this year is updating the EOC. The EOC has been in the fire station. It's ready to go right now, but it was really operated by our CCAS group. And that was run by two of the sergeants that have since retired in the city. Once they retired, that group kind of fell to the wayside and kind of the membership dwindled. The last year and a half, I've really been focused on getting that group re-engaged. I've been going to the meetings. They've been coming to the station. And their main job is to get that EOC upgraded and ready to go again. Like I said, it's ready to go right now, but they're upgrading a lot of the radios and stuff. So some of the things they're working on is outfitting that trailer that we have to be used in a mobile command if we need it. And then they're working on bringing all the radios up to speed, making sure everything's updated. The computer IT's helping out with the computers and the screens in the EOC. They're working on replacing the antennas on top, adding new antennas. So they're really focused on making sure that we've brought that up and we've updated it because it's been there 20 years. A lot of the radios, a lot of the equipment is outdated. We need to bring that back up. So updating the EOC, getting it ready to go with that group is the last thing that really kind of we're focusing on. So those are the three things that I've been tasked with working on to get that emergency operations center, emergency management in the city running again. And that's, you know, the CEMP was kind of the top overriding thing we needed to get going. And then now that we have that in place, or if we'll have that in place once it's approved tonight, then we can start working on training on it and making sure all the city staff is up to date on what they need to do in case of emergencies, and then also look for gaps or things that we need to work on to improve in the coming years. So that's kind of an overview of what we're doing. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them tonight.
Councilor Button?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief Bailey. And first of all, I want to commend you for the work that you've been doing on this. We talked about it in public safety, and, you know, it's one of those things that when you come across a disaster, you suddenly realize what you should have and may not be there. And I think this is an important thing, and not only having staff, all the staff of the city involved, having gone through similar things for, you know, in my world, is that you never can anticipate for what happens, and it happened this morning. We arrived at the bank, no power for about 5 hours, and it's like, you have to be ready for these things. And I think the one thing that we stressed, and that's contingencies, making sure that if, for instance, we have a major event that prevents some of the staff from arriving, or takes them away out in the field and dealing with broken water mains or other things, how do we step up and still respond and be swift in doing so? So I think this is really important for the council. I want to make sure that when you have the opportunity to participate, please participate. You know, it's not necessarily part of our role, but it's important for us to know and be part of this, so that we're embedded in it, so that we understand the needs that the departments have, so that we are prepared, that we can respond. So please don't take that lightly when the opportunity comes up. In the meantime, and I've mentioned this before, be sure to spend some time in the different departments, especially the fire and the police, and see what they're going through every day, because that will help as well on that. And finally, I'm excited that, you know, you're getting CCAS back up and running, because we have a lot of volunteers that step up, and we need to make sure they have the tools, the resources to respond. And some of it's going to come back to the council, and where we can advocate at King County to get the things that we need, because we're somewhat remote to the rest of the county. And that means in special cases, we will have to depend on ourselves and what we put together. And finally, and that's regional cooperation. As you've heard from the chief, especially in fire, we definitely depend on other departments. So whatever we can do to support that going forward is very, very critical. So thank you very much, Chief.
And if I can, I just want to tag on what you said about the CCAS group, just to publicly say that is an amazing group. They're highly motivated. They know way more than I do about radios. My role is to kind of keep them reined in a little bit and to provide the budget and the finances. But that group is really, they've done a great job, not only getting the EOC up and running again, but just the knowledge that they have. Actually, one of the members of the CCAS group worked for the company that built the consoles that are in our EOC. So they've done a great job. They've done way more than I've been able to handle myself. And like I said, I'm just kind of there to help give them a little guidance and provide the budget that you've so graciously given us for the emergency management. But that they're doing a phenomenal job, and I'm looking forward to where we're going to go this year with that group.
Any other comments? Councilor Cotton?
Thank you, Chief. As you said, emergency preparedness is always something that we do tend to take for granted until we really need it. But even after this weekend, with seeing how full the river was, and you know, bringing a few flashbacks, I'm sure. But anyway, thank you for all the work you've put into this document, as well as highlighting this for us as for going forward. It's very exciting. Thank you.
Councilor Benson and then Councilor Johnson.
So, in the training that you're talking about, you mentioned, tabletop flood exercises and figuring out everybody's responsibilities. What I was wondering is, obviously you can't do an elaborate training for every possible, uh, emergency that could happen, but, yeah, I'm originally from Southern California and worked in the Palisades and Brentwood and Malibu area, and so obviously fire has been really on my mind. And what I was wondering is how much does doing a tabletop exercise on flood scale to other emergencies? How much of it is just the process of facing an emergency and figuring out how to parcel out the different jobs?
Sure, a lot of it, just like you said, is process, whatever the scenario is. Sure, there are maybe a little bits of tweaks here and there based on the actual scenario, as in who you might need to contact to get a certain thing. But really, what we're exercising is the processes. Who do we talk to? How do I interact with Public Works? How do I interact with PD? How do we do the record keeping in the EOC that we need to make sure that we keep track of so we get funds back from the federal government down the road? How do we reach out to contact those at King County and make sure we're getting, so a lot of that is the process, and it doesn't really matter necessarily what the scenario is. But in relation to that, though, that's part of what the CEMP, because if you look through there, there's different annexes that talk specifically about some of those different scenarios: wildfire, earthquake, floods. And that's where having this built, some of the things that are specific to a flood or specific to a wildfire, that's where you're going to find some of that information. And also, as we work on it and build out in the EOC, there's going to be, but they've had them in the past. They need to be updated. They need to be created. But there's actually books for each department. There's a book on, okay, what are you going to, if you're assigned to be the operations lead, this is what you're going to work on. If you're working in planning, this is what you're going to work on. These are how you do these things, kind of like a resource guide. And that will also be separated out by different things where you'll be able to find, okay, here's all the people that you might need to talk to in regards to a flood. Here's all the people you might need, or things you need to think about in regards to a wildfire. So those documents kind of together all give you the specifics on how to deal with a certain type. But really, the exercising that we're working on this year is really just the processes. Really, how do we make that emergency operations center functional and hum when we need it to? And it's really not as specific. We picked flood, and we also picked, we're going to be doing a snow emergency later on, just because it kind of fits into some other things that the city is doing in regards to the community planning department, some of the things that they need for some grants. They need to exercise some floods. That's why we picked that one specifically. But really, it's the processes that we're working on.
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway.
So your comment, we haven't exercised the EOC in a couple of years. I think last year we had the big windstorm, significant trees down, power outage for a couple of days. Was there a moment of decision in there to say EOC or not EOC, and what was the trigger?
We talked about it, and there's actually different levels of operation. There's full activation, there's partial activation, and then there's monitoring. And so in those cases, we didn't necessarily have the EOC fully operational. We did have partial activation where myself was monitoring different pieces. Mr. Chambliss was looking at different pieces. So we had it open for, not officially the EOC open, but we've been monitoring it at some of the different levels. We've just never gotten to that full activation. And so really the difference to go from partial to a full activation is a combination of my decision, as well as speaking with the mayor and the city administrator, talking about, have we reached that level where we really need to open it? Or is it something that really we can just coordinate ourselves between myself and Chambliss, or whoever might be involved with Public Works or the police department? It doesn't require a full activation. Usually the full activations are for large, full-scale incidents, especially if it's something that we might be seeking federal reimbursement for later. But really, it's a span of control thing. If it's something that can be covered by just one or two people in the span of control, we don't need the full EOC operation.
Councilor Johnson.
Thank you. So as a teacher, I give quizzes before tests. So teach a bunch of the unit, then give a quiz, then I teach more of the unit, and then they do a test, right? So the reason I do that is to give the students a low stakes opportunity to gauge their own understanding of the material. and of course, to help me decide if I need to reteach something that clearly we missed the mark somehow, or adjust the upcoming lessons as necessary. And while I understand that we do have occasionally in posts on social media, other kinds of information giving media, we explain to the public what their responsibilities are for being prepared, things like how many days of food should they have, how many days of water should they have, etc. But what I do wonder is, do we have a process currently, or should there be one for assessing how well the general public is retaining that information, and if there is a better, if needed, if there's any other modes or methods that we should or could do to better get out that information? If I just had to put out a wild guess, I would bet that probably a larger proportion than most of us would like are actually underprepared, and that a smaller proportion are prepared. So I guess that's kind of my question is there a process, or should there be one for figuring out how well the public is obtaining and retaining that information and kind of making the necessary plans?
I would say currently there's a lot of resources outside the city. I would say inside the city, probably nothing in place right now. Like I said, 2025 is really focusing on getting our ducks in a row and making sure that we have all our staff ready. And then that would be, once we're confident in what we've done and prepared, then that would be the next thing, is to make sure then to turn to the community as a whole to make sure that we can focus a little bit more on some of those educational pieces. I mean, like I said, we do a little bit of it with CERT and some of the things, but honestly, we could probably do a better job. And that would be something that would be the next step of this, is once we get ourselves in a row, then maybe we want to look more specifically at what can we do for our actual community. Like I said, there's a lot of resources out there through King County and things like that, but not necessarily for our specific community, other than, some of the information we have on our website and things like that. But just like anything else, it can always be improved. And that's where we're going to look for some of those gaps and some of those places where we can kind of fill in. Maybe that's going to be a survey out to the community, knowing what we have, building up our web presence in regards to emergency management. There's a couple different ways we tackle it, and I will be able to work with the city communication manager and stuff as we move forward, and kind of figure out a best plan to do that. So that's going to be something maybe that we'll be looking at in the following year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? City Administrator Cameron?
Just wanted to note that you also can take ICS 100, 200, 700, 800. If you do an internet search for FEMA ICS 100, you will see those classes. They are all online. They're free. You'll get a number from FEMA. That's your number forever. Don't lose it. And that'll give you an awareness of what goes on in EOC during emergency. And then they also have higher level classes for elected officials once you get those basic classes passed. You don't need a 300 and 400, but there are some 200 classes that you could take too if you're interested.
Thank you. Any other
Thank you,
comments?
Chief. Good job.
Thank you, Chief Bailey. Okay, going to vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay?
Approving
And it's unanimous, approving Resolution 1708, approving the 2024 Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan Update. Is there any further report from Public Safety Committee?
None at this time, thank you.
Is there any report from Community Development Committee?
No report at this time, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Next item is utility rate study discussion. We have Dylan Gamble, who's our CIP manager, and Sergey of FCS is online, and they will provide kind of a presentation and then discussion.
Okay. Good evening, Council, and thank you, Mayor. Yes, exactly as the Mayor described, we are going to go over the utility rate study and kind of looking specifically at the different models, or I suppose you can consider them options or solutions on how the rate study can be modeled. And What we're going to be looking at tonight is essentially three models, which we have nicknames in our presentation later. So I'll let those speak for themselves. But in short, you would have reviewed the ordinance that we had back at the very beginning of January, and that is just nicknamed ordinance. So that's a version, a way that the rate study can be conducted. Another version that was reviewed at the very beginning of that this year was the kind of reduction of certain debt coverage and details like that. We kind of discussed this pretty heavily around debt coverage. So that one's nicknamed the debt coverage scenario. Following that, we had a more deep dive into the CIP and how the CIP is impacting the rate study, and kind of spinning out of that, we proposed a new model that kind of goes into further detail and kind of deeper dives on a more aggressive rate reduction strategy. So that one's nicknamed the aggressive rate reduction model. So what we're going to showcase tonight, and Sergey's going to get into all the details on this one, show you all the charts since we can go all the way through, is essentially how they all compare to each other as three different options, and kind of show the impacts or how they look to a resident. In this case, we created that modeled average resident. We kind of showcase it across all three of those models. And then we'll show you the impacts in terms of the cost of service analysis and how it impacts commercial and multifamily. And we can go into all the details for any of the other ones, but this presentation is going to be really focused on that, the newest of the three options as a consideration. So with all that said, I'm going to go kick it over to Sergey and we can get started on the presentation.
Thank you, Dylan, and good evening, Council. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great. Well, I'm sharing my screen, so hopefully you can see the presentation. So I'll just dive right in. And thanks again for joining me today to talk about the updates to our ongoing rate study. As a quick outline, we're going to touch upon the background just to refresh ourselves where we have been. We're going to really quickly go over the rate study process, as I'm sure everybody has become an expert by now. And then we'll dive into the scenarios, focusing on the latest and newest scenario, as Dylan has mentioned. Feel free to ask questions as we go throughout. So as a quick refresher, we started the study earlier in 2024. Since then, we have been focusing on developing the analysis and started to meet through various meetings with the Parks and Public Works Committee, as well as the full City Council, to talk about the various steps of the study process. We had several meetings to talk about the first step of the process, the revenue requirement, earlier in the summertime. We then followed up those meetings with the discussion of cost of service, which happened sometime in the fall, and then finished things off kind of introducing the technical components through various meetings in around the winter time. Since then, in the beginning of the new year, we had 2 additional meetings on January 7th and 13th with a committee and a council, which gave us some additional guidance. And since then, we have been meeting with the committee to iron out some of that guidance, making sure that we're capturing all the direction appropriately and introducing the updated scenario as recently as last week. So our goal today, as I mentioned before, and Dylan has pointed out, is to focus on the comparison of the latest scenario to the prior options that we have presented. Just to remind everybody, a comprehensive study such as this one is a 3-step process that has to be done sequentially. We start out by identifying the overall revenue needs of each utility independently, making sure that each utility can sustain itself. Then we move on to apportioning costs within the water and sewer utilities to look at interclass cost allocation and equity to see if customer classes are paying their appropriate share of costs. And lastly, we develop the actual fixed and variable charges assessed to our customers. So the last kind of touch points that gave us guidance was, as I mentioned before, with the committee and the full council earlier in January. At those meetings, we received some clear direction to look at the comprehensive capital improvement program and identify projects that are high priority versus moderate and low, and see what we can do to defer or move some of the moderate and low projects around to give us some flexibility with our rates. We also wanted to look at maximizing our borrowing as an alternative, which could reduce some pressure on the front end from our rate impacts. Along with that guidance, we received direction to look at seeing if individual utilities can go below the city's internal target of 1.5 or a coverage ratio for total debt, while the total debt still has to be still has to be above the 1.50 target for the three utilities combined. So for these options, we can go below the 1.50 individually, but on a combined basis, we have to still meet that combined target of 1.50. So that was the major guidance that we received from those meetings. Now, as a quick snapshot in the preview, on this slide, we wanted to provide you a quick comparison of the key items and changes between the scenarios. As Dylan has described it, the first scenario that we were developing and coming to around to towards the end of last year and the beginning of this year was the ordinance scenario. Under that scenario, we're not deferring any capital. Our total borrowing was almost $34 million. The sewer loan for one of the bigger projects, the low interest loan, was assumed to have a 20-year term. And the total cost of borrowing, which includes the interest cost paid over the life of the loan, as well as the issuance cost included in that amount, was close to $19 million, in addition to the net debt proceeds borrowed. The combined coverage ratio during the lowest year was about 1.75, and the sewer coverage, which is one of the key drivers behind this discussion, was 1.59. During one of their meetings in January, we presented a reduced coverage scenario that tried to reduce some of the rate pressure on our customers. During that scenario, we increased the debt slightly to about 34.2 million, kept the same sewer loan assumptions, but the cost of borrowing did increase because we increased the total borrowing. The coverage ratios did decrease for the sewer utility below the 1.50, but on a combined basis, we're forecasting during the lowest year to be able to hit the metric of 1.50. The newest scenario that we're titling aggressive rate reduction option moves around about $4 million of projects. So it identified moderate to low risk projects and moved them around and deferred them into the future. We are now assuming we're going to be borrowing quite a bit more, about $41 million of new debt proceeds, up from the $33.5 million in the ordinance scenario and $34.2 million in the reduced coverage scenario. We're also extending the life and the term of the sewer loan to a 30-year term to give us a little bit more of a runway to where we can smooth out the rate pressure on the sewer utility, since it's one of the key drivers for the short term. Now, with these assumptions, with greater debt and a longer term duration, our cost of borrowing does increase as well to almost $25 million. Under this scenario, the combined target during the lowest tier would be above the 1.50 at 1.53, and the sewer coverage would be about 1.31, still above the kind of the bare minimum requirement for the combined debt at 1.25, but below the internal policy target of 1.50 individually. Now, I know there's a couple of tables here. It might be a little crowded, so I do apologize, but we wanted to provide you with as much side-by-side comparison as we could. On this slide, what you'll find is a combined average residential bill that is applied to each of the scenarios. So at the top, we have the original ordinance scenario, which is showing that the first year was going to experience approximately a 12.4% increase. And one item to remember is that this is before cost of service. This is the overall system before we start apportioning costs between classes. So the residential class was looking at a front end increase of 12.4, then the next year about 6.5, just rounding there, and then below 5% after that. The reduced coverage scenario brought it down by a couple of percentage points, by about 2 to 10.2. The second year at about 6.4, and again below 5% thereafter. And the newest scenario accomplishes approximately a 7% increase in 2025. So another 3% reduction from the reduced coverage option, and then keeps the future increases under 4% as well. So in addition to the front end reduction, there are future ongoing annual rate reductions as well. Now, a quick check-in on the cost of service, because it does impact each class differently. For the updated cost of service, we are still using the same guidance that the council gave us during the last year and throughout the study. We are trying to implement the changes gradually over time. We're not trying to get there all at once. This is consistent to prior studies as well as the guidance we received from council this time around. The proportionality and the impact from the changes are approximately the same as what we introduced with prior options. Just basic guidance, keeping it high level. Any class that was approximately at cost of service would get approximately average increases. Anybody who was paying too much was going to be either frozen at 0%, like the multifamily class, or be increased below the average, and that would allow them to grow into the rate over time. If a class of service needed to go up more than average, their increases on an annual basis were slightly more than average to allow them to make progress towards cost of service while trying to mitigate an upfront bigger increase, trying to resolve the cost of service all in 1 year. So again, very similar, just the overall adjustments and increases were scaled down for this new aggressive rate reduction option. So what does that mean? On the next couple of slides, you're going to see bill impacts by class of service, focusing on each of the 3 options. So again, the upper portion of the table will show now the class specific, not the revenue requirement system average, but the class specific increases and impacts. The ordinance scenario was showing about 12%, followed by 6s and 4 1/4s or 4 1/2s, depending on the year. The reduced coverage scenario brought the front end down below 10%, then around 6, and then 4 1/2s to 4 1/4s thereafter. And the new option brings the front end down to below 7 at about 6.77, followed by slightly over 3% thereafter for a typical average combined bill. Multifamily customers originally saw a 5% increase or slightly below 5, followed by 2s and 1s. The modified reduced coverage option brought it down to 3 1/2, down to 2 and then 1s. And the new aggressive rate reduction keeps it at below 2 at 1.65, and then at 1% or so, and then around 0.7% thereafter. On the commercial low, we were seeing similar increases as the residential, maybe slightly higher at 12.7, followed by 6.9, and then 5s or so thereafter. The reduced coverage option brought it down to about 10.7, then close to 7% and 5s or so thereafter. And then the newest scenario, the aggressive rate reduction, brings the average increase on the front end to about 7 1/4, followed by approximately 4% thereafter. So again, consistent reduction for this class as well. And then lastly, we have the commercial high class of service, which was close to 19% before originally, then 9 1/4, and then 6 1/2s or so down to 5s thereafter. The reduced coverage was around 15 1/2, followed by 9, and then 6.7 to 5% thereafter. The newest option brings it down to 11 1/2, 6.2 or so, and then anywhere from 6 and 1/4 or so down to a little under 6% per year. So again, significant impacts or reductions here under this option as well. And that really brings us to the end of the presentation. The guidance we're looking from you today is regarding the option. We have the ordinance scenario, as you saw from before, the original reduced option, and then the aggressive reduction, as well as any alternative that you may inquire about. So any questions?
Council, do we have any questions? Councilor Watton?
I'm encouraged by the 3rd scenario that's being brought forward tonight. The one thing that's ruminating in my mind is that how we landed, and please help me understand. I know that we were trying to be sensitive to multifamily, but at the same time, you're raising commercial above the average percentage increase. How did we end up with that?
So just as a quick refresher, I went back to the cost of service slide. In each of the utilities tables, so the upper table is for water and the lower table is for sewer, the analysis performed indicated how does each class of service cost allocation based on the cost of service principles widely accepted in the industry and specific to the utility based on the data used for the utility compared to how we're actually collecting revenues from each class of service. And what we found, especially on the sewer side, is that commercial high, which has the highest treatment requirements and strength constituent contributions, they were still showing that they were not paying their allocated share of costs. And these findings are consistent with the findings from the prior studies, even going back to 2016. The historical approach has been just to gradually, very slowly move them towards cost recovery over time, allowing them time to modify their behavior, as well as account for any changes that may occur. So it's the impact of the cost of service analysis which distributes costs based on how the customers are using the system. Does that help?
Counselor Watton?
May I ask a follow-up question? Do we have comparisons to similar sized cities as far as our proposed utility rate costs versus theirs based on the classification, or is that getting too granular for comparison's sake?
At this point, we mainly have the residential comparisons. It would be quite a little bit more of an effort to pull together the classes we could pull that survey. It would just take a bit more time and effort.
City Administrator Chambliss?
I would encourage you to include more variables because type of sewer plant has a huge impact on cost, and type of water supply also has a huge impact on cost.
Counselor Benson?
In answer to your original question about the multifamily versus, we had there was a really good graph that we were shown earlier on that talked about the zone of reasonableness for different classes, and how for several years multifamily has been outside of, I think it was I want to say it was within 10% was the zone of reasonableness, and they were outside of that on the high side. Commercial was outside of it on the low side. But there are other, to your point, there are other factors to consider. For example, the fact that we want our reclaimed water used, it's a benefit to the city to use it because it frees up other water. So there's value in that, to the point that you're making. But as for why there was a focus on multifamily, it was because their rates have been outside of that zone of reasonableness on the high side for a while. I can't remember how long
Well,
exactly.
you have to go back. At one stage it was, a gallon of water costs you so much. A little more scientific than that. But then we went through this breakdown of, again, residential, multifamily, low commercial, high commercial, and how much it costs to treat their sewage in each of those categories, which drove an assumption of cost. And ever since then, we've been trying to drive everybody to match up with what it costs to provide the service to what they're paying for the service.
And I
So
think
multifamily and commercial high, which are outside those zones, we've kept multifamily level to slowly bring them back down.
yeah, and there's and to Director Chambliss's, City Administrator Chambliss's point, there are myriad variables that we could use to compare these things, and each one of them is reasonable in a different way, and so balancing all of that, I think is why we get the fat stacks of cash.
We know.
I mean,
Is your hand? Okay.
Yeah.
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway?
I mean, we have done that comparison, and we did at least on residential, and we've always been within the mean, okay, on our rates. Ultimately, our community really doesn't necessarily care where we get the water or how we treat it. They care what their utility bill is.
Mhm.
Okay, so I hear you, but I think the comparison needs to be rate to rate. And we've always been fairly within the, like I said, within the mean. I'd have to go back and look at the chart, but always within a reasonable mean of the overall rates of comparable cities and neighboring cities.
Sergey, can I screen share?
Yeah, I can stop sharing.
Thanks. So this is going to be a bit of a back and forth between different PowerPoints if we want to go that route, but I just wanted to show you we've shown you this chart before.
Yeah.
So this is a look at kind of how so we've been reviewing a lot of the rate study increases through a hypothetical residential citizen that uses some amount of water, some amount of sewer, and such. And we've tried to, as best we can, showcase how their bills get broadcast across different jurisdictions. So what we have not done is created this chart, putting another version of Snoqualmie in there for this proposed most recent scenario. But you can see how the two scenarios that we proposed there before kind of showcase it. If you were to consider that this one is trying to aggressively reduce the rate increases for citizens, then it's going to end up much closer to it's going to be below the proposed one right now. Now, is it going to get below this 2024 Snoqualmie? It won't, because we have to increase rates by 6.7% across or average, right? So it will go up, but again, and Sergey, I can sense you're in my back of my head here. All these are moving metrics. So these jurisdictions are changing their rates as we speak. Some of them are much higher already, so to speak, and they're intending to move them again. And so it's kind of a bit of a moving target. And then, just as Mike Chambliss said, you'll see a lot of the water ones will be kind of lined up with each other. And that's because they're all in the same water jurisdictional area. And same thing with sewer. If you're in the greater, King County area, and they're all interconnected using the same King County sewer system, their citizens get charged the same rate, but they're a much bigger group, and they essentially have a scale benefit that they can get. And I can go to that slide if you want, the other one that showcases it, but I figured we should stay here for a sec.
Councilor Watton?
This is helpful. Thank you. This is the residential. I'd be interested in seeing commercial, both high and low, against our peers like North Bend, because we're kind of competing, if you didn't notice, against North Bend for business, and business revenue drives taxes for us as well. So I'd be curious at seeing that, if we could do the same on multifamily, because they have a certain amount of multifamily that's kind of competing with us, and we want to be competitive, and we want to keep housing costs affordable, but at what expense on the business side as well. And then that's what's in the back of my mind.
Is that something that everyone wants to see, the comparisons on those? And I don't know how easy that is to get it either.
Sergey, can you answer that one? I haven't seen how you guys collected your commercial data, just the residential.
We would have to survey each one of these individual entities, find the class of service. Not every utility has the same definition of a commercial class. Some of them don't have strength classes, some do. So we would have to make assumptions which classification of service most closely mimics the typical class of service. Some don't have multifamily separated, some do. So we may have to make some assumptions. So it's going to be a bit more comprehensive and time intensive than the residential alone. Trying to search through code is pretty much searching codes, searching what's published for these entities, especially during this point of the year. Not everybody passes their increases right in January. So we would have to double check if they're the most recent and updated, and just the time exercise of pulling the information, organize it, and displaying it.
Rates are gonna go up, trying to find out if our rates are gonna go up.
Did you have a follow-up then, Councilor Watton?
Yeah, one
And then
quick
Mary.
one. Could we pick 3 peer cities? I mean, I don't care about Bellevue. I don't care about, I do care, but
Nobody cares about
yeah, well,
Bellevue.
that's true. But I'd like to see at least North Bend and maybe 2 others that are similar geographically, proximity to us, rather than looking at all 10. I don't need 10. I just need a couple reference points.
Art. Or maybe a request to be, can you pick the 3, but the 3 most connected would probably be the 3 top ones up there. So it would be North Bend, Sultan, and Carnation that operate independent systems, so similar to ours.
Representative Holloway, do you have?
So I guess 2 things. One, we'll let you and Sergey pick the comparables. Some of these may be skewed by, they haven't done anything to their wastewater facilities for 50 years, and they get a bill, or they flood the house across the street. Not naming names. But that may influence the rates. Okay, so I think it's appropriate for staff to go ahead and pick what the comparables are and come back to us.
Okay.
But I do want to bring us back to really the question for tonight of those 3 different approaches of calculating rates out, which one do we want to tell them to go for? And I think it's the aggressive, dead aggressive at this stage to try and keep those rates down.
Counselor Benson?
Yeah, and I'm wondering, I appreciate the question, that Councilmember Watton is, asking, but I'm wondering, to what extent is it moot? Because, if we look at what we have the ability to do from a financial standpoint, that with the debt something or others that have to be at 1.5 something or other, it feels like what we're being proposed is maxing that capacity out, and we have there are things that we have to pay for that we're going to have to pay for regardless. What I appreciate about this scenario is that idea of generational equity that states that, people 30 years from now are also going to be contributing to paying for these upgrades that we're doing to the system that are supposed to last for 50 years, rather than front loading it on the people who live here now. We live in a very nomadic society where a large percentage of the people who live here now aren't going to be living here in 30 years. And the idea of having those people pay for everything so that it's cheap for people who move in later on is irksome to me. So I think that, in my opinion, I don't see another option than the aggressive one. That seems like the fairest one, and our best option, in my opinion. You may have a different opinion, but you've been wrong on other things.
Counselor Johnson?
Yes, I got,
There, all right.
let's see, there, okay. So I've got, I think 3 things. The first is, I suppose I'm kind of speculating a little here, but I would wonder, would there be certain costs that would have to exist, certain equipment, staffing, et cetera, that would have to exist if there were going to be high commercial uses of the system anyway, and even if there were a small number of businesses? So is it possible that there could be not necessarily the same or similar expense, but with at least within an order of magnitude or so, for 2 cities, where let's say one has 100 large businesses and another one had high commercial uses, where another one has 10. So in other words, the cost per business would be actually fairly high to cover the cost of servicing that need for the city that has fewer users. Did that question make sense?
Yes, I think it's very complicated to kind of answer it. So to give maybe some highlights, some examples here, we have a certain set of businesses that produce a certain type of waste, right?
Right.
And so we've talked about how we have high commercial waste and lower commercial waste for sewer. And the reality is that we have a lot more than just those in terms of like a range of spectrum of options. And there's a wild range of kind of necessities needed for our system to be able to manage that. And you're right that every jurisdiction is going to have a different version of that. I don't necessarily have the data to go grab every jurisdiction's version of all the commercial class and what their likely outputs are. And I don't think Sergey can, but can you tell me if you can? Yeah, so that's going to be one aspect for us. It's going to be difficult to compare perfectly. To compare on average, we can kind of do that, and that's kind of what we're trying to do with our average bills and like a hypothetical customer class that fits into a commercial low or commercial high. That's what we're trying to showcase, but it's really comparing ourselves past and future rather than to other jurisdictions.
I suppose what I'm getting at is that if there's a really high need for service that's very expensive, but you have a small number of users that are needing that high amount of service, that the bill's going to be higher.
So the way we apportion costs, at least for the sewer utility, is we look at the type of cost. Is it a cost associated with providing customer service? So it doesn't really change with the type of, and the level of usage, how big you are. You know, it costs us the same to send a bill. Doesn't matter if it's to a residential home or a large business. We look at how much flow or volume of waste that you send to the treatment plant, and that's strictly related to the number of just gallons or CCF that you're discharging. And then we're looking at your concentration of waste. So how more concentrated your waste is on a equivalent basis. If you would equate it, how many pounds of waste do you do for the same unit of water? So based on those adjustments, we allocate costs more or less to different costs of service. So we don't necessarily focus on if there's a specific fixed cost infrastructure being spread by one customer versus two customers. In this case, we're focusing on how concentrated the waste that you're providing in aggregate. Now, built into that, you have components of a fixed treatment plant that's there. But again, we're trying to apportion everybody a proportional share of cost based on their concentration. Now, jurisdictionally, it's challenging to do because by cost causation principles, if you have your own treatment plant and the treatment plant was designed to treat waste in certain concentrations, that has to be passed on proportionally to your customers. Some utilities receive treatment as a wholesale cost. So King County Treatment provides wholesale treatment to their customers, and they don't weight their treatment cost to each of their customers or cities or districts based on strength of concentration, or they don't even care in their pricing based on how concentrated the waste is. They just look at volume. So in those instances, those entities would not be passing along a strength signal because they personally don't receive a strength message. So they're going to have a different structure for their high constituent customers because there's just not a price signal they receive. So it's very apples and oranges when you're performing these comparisons because some entities have a cost signal which should be passed on. Other entities don't have a cost signal and they will not be passed on whatsoever.
Councilor Washington.
No, I think Councilmember Benson makes an excellent point with the generational equity principle. I think that's sound. My question is maybe for the finance director. So in option 3, the aggressive rate reduction scenario, effectively we're taking on more debt as a city. What does that do to our future ability to issue debt?
So in essence, the city has a debt capacity that it can issue debt, but these are revenue bonds that we are issuing, and so we're not limited. We're basically only limited to the revenue that we're collecting overall. So this is not a general obligation bond, which means we don't have any sort of state law that we're overseeing. So it really depends on the rate revenue, and if we're generating that sufficiently, we can take out as much debt as we potentially want to.
As it relates to this.
Correct. It does have a long-term impact, right? So in essence, you will have this kind of debt that you're going to be paying back over a long period of time. So it's going to impact probably those customers down the road, 30 years, right, overall. But in the short term, for the most part, this will help to keep the rates lower for our customers today.
So does the same principle apply, Director, on the general fund side of it for revenue bonds? That we would be able to, as long as we can go out and create the revenue?
So there generally is no revenue bonds for the general fund. So you're pledging your full faith and credit, right, of the city at that point, and that you would generate sufficient tax revenue in order to be able to pay back those investors in our bonds at that point. So this is really just a mechanism. We're treating this as a business. Business, if it's able to generate revenue from its ratepayers, can pay back the bonds over time. And there's no limitation on a business type activity here at the city. The general fund and all the kind of departments in that general fund are not businesses necessarily, they're governments. And so consequently, yeah, there's a limitation to that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the education. Appreciate it.
Councilor Watton and then Mayor Pro Tem Holloway.
So I think the other point too to that whole scenario is that these rate studies are ongoing, and we go back and we look at these at least every 5 years, if not more, frequently, and we can make adjustments according to the rate. It's not like this is permanent. As you can see, we go out to 2030, but even during that time, if inflation outstrips the costs, we need to recoup it at some point. So keep that in mind as well.
Right,
Robert.
so we may want to target, right, a different ratio of cash to debt financing overall at that stage. And there could be other things that could happen during this time period too, including growth in the community, for example, that could increase the number of ESUs or ERUs that we're generating, which will increase the operating revenue that we'll generate from this, that could help to potentially also keep the rates lower over time as well. So, you know, you'll have to, you know, this is a snapshot in time right at this stage. And so we'll know more in 2 to 3 years what the situation looks like. We come back, we revise our plan moving forward. We adopt some sort of plan at that time, and then we'll continue that kind of progression every 2 to 3 years.
Just to add some, just in case here, we do always want to make sure that all of our rates are justified by the system. And so basically what I'm trying to say is, as you know, it does take a bit of time to make the rates change to reflect what is needed. So they don't turn on a dime, so to speak, but they do take some time, and we always want to make sure that our rates are reflective. Otherwise, we'll create a lot of unfairness and choices like that. So just to make sure we can't just like quickly change. We do want to make sure all of our changes are based on something.
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway.
So I do want to kind of follow on some of what you said, though. If you take into consideration the debt reserve policy we have, this aggressive rate is maxing out against that. So we would have, if something comes up and we need more debt, we would have to change our policy to go after it. Now, the policy is pretty generous, but it's good there. It does help in, it's not speaking to the mic, somebody's gonna scold me. It does help in our ratings. And a lot of the debt is also, it's more of a line of credit that as we need it, we'll go get it and pull it in. It doesn't all happen the night after we put these rates in place. So I'm partially wrong and partially right, but the plan is we're maxing our debt. So we'll need to watch that as we move forward.
Councilor Johnson.
All right, my second item was covered by another council member, very helpful. The last thing I wanted to ask about then is for the more aggressive version. I got the maximizing debt. Cool. Was there anything else that went into that, or is that the only thing that drove down those rates?
I could answer, but okay. Essentially, we looked at kind of a multitude of things as part of that CIP review. We also considered some CIP project delays, and I'd say to kind of shortlist them, we had some corrections for the remainder of 384th. We had delays to undergrounding the water, the Class A, and the sewer underneath the Snoqualmie River. Whatever, it's essentially a feasibility study in the earlier years, followed by the implementation of whatever the feasibility study says to best do. And so we essentially moved that whole package out, and then actually delayed a lot of funds from the combined utility section, if you recall, on the CIP. And I believe that's the bulk of the changes that were implemented in the CIP, but that has a lot of ramifications when you move several projects over in years.
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway.
So one other thing, for the reclaimed water reservoir to be used by irrigation, we're getting the state is giving us access to funds to support that at a very nice rate, 1.9?
Yep, for the 30
1.9%, which is,
1.6%.
okay, somewhere. I'll go with 1.6.
Yeah.
Which is an excellent rate, and we were maxing that out to the extent we could to get that low-cost money.
Do they want to loan us other money?
So we do.
Yeah, they did.
So I think I can.
Let's borrow it all.
This was presented. I don't think you were at the meeting, but we received notification from Ecology that they're going to increase our award, so to speak, for the
Yeah,
loan.
they did.
For reals?
For reals.
Reals.
For reals.
Wow, that's awesome. I did miss that.
At that
So I-
rate, right? At that
We assumed a one,
the
or
1.6.
6.8, I believe, and I think it went up by 1.8.
Wow, that's
Heck of a
great.
deal.
Still at the 30-year term.
So I do have a question about the policy. So the sewer with this aggressive, utility aggressive rate scenario, the sewer then would be at a 1.3, and many of our projects are sewer. And so if the Department of Ecology comes and says, you need to do this additional project or something in the future, our policy is already low, but we're combining it with water and stormwater. So is there an issue getting a loan on additional sewer projects because it's already at 1.3?
Yeah, so I have three kind of step answers here. One, the loan actually does change the coverage a little bit because we have less interest we're going to pay over time. It kind of squeaks by. Two, every year that we are moving forward in time kind of changes our debt coverage. So next year, we're going to have a different coverage ratio essentially because we're going to change our revenues in terms of rates as well as how much debt we have in that 1 year. So those things are all changing. And what we didn't show you is that we are watching it every year to see how, for example, new debt incurs on that debt coverage ratio whenever we incur new debt every 2 years. And then the last one is that the 1.5 policy, and I'm streaming through here, is that is a self-selected coverage ratio, not a requirement by a bonding agency, but what it represents is our own financial policies that we're following as a rule for ourselves, and that by not following our own policies, we do incur essentially we don't look like we're following our own rules stigma. Whether or not that negatively impacts our ability to collect bonds is a little bit ambiguous, and whether it changes our rates is a bit ambiguous.
Well, so if there's a competitive sale of a bond, you want your debt coverage ratio as high as it could possibly be, because that means that you're less of a risk that you're going to default on the bond moving forward. So we've set our target at 1.5. We think that's reasonable when it comes to the bond rating agencies, that they're going to look favorably upon that. Other organizations may have a lower debt coverage ratio of 1.25. Once you start trailing or getting down that low, you're probably going to see your interest rates start to creep up a little bit more. And so we want to be more on the conservative, safe side, I think, fiscally overall here at the city. But right now, with the 1.5 that we have in place, I'm feeling that this is a very tight plan, if I could throw one word out there for the most part, where we are going to have to stay on top of this. It's going to be incumbent upon not only just Dylan, myself, the Parks Public Works Director, but the water, sewer, stormwater superintendents to really watch their budgets very, very carefully. Making sure that also the project managers watch their project budgets really, really carefully. Because it is, in my impression, a very tight plan that we're going with here potentially. And so there's going to be much more of a focus from our side in the finance department to make sure that we are very clear on expectations with people moving forward. So what this means.
So we had Mayor Pro Tem Holloway, Councilmember Johnson, and
Well,
now
And I think you partially, the 1.5 is internal, it doesn't say what the market would allow us to debt. It's like buying your house, they'll sell you any house you want. It's what the family budget is, what you're willing to do. Our family budget is set by that 1.5 debt margin. Okay, but if we get into a bad situation, the market we may reconsider that policy and go get additional debt, but it's gotta be a really bad thing to go do that now.
I think Councilmember Johnson, did you still have your comment? Councilmember Cotton.
Yeah, one more thing, and that was, I was just trying to find the source on this, but anyway, with regard to staffing, I think we have a couple of positions that are related to urban forestry, and that some of that or all of it is covered under wastewater, I think. Is that right? Stormwater, that's what I meant to say. Yes. I was wondering if some or all of that could be moved to the general fund with regard to how it's related to parks and things like that, et cetera. And if that could cost any further.
So I guess I'll try to address this if you don't mind.
No, please. Yeah.
In essence, I would say about 5 years ago, we actually transitioned urban forestry to the stormwater operating fund that we have currently, Fund 403, largely on the basis of a report that was conducted by the urban forestry team here at the city of Snoqualmie that showed that there was a substantial nexus between funding for urban forestry and the ability to reduce the amount of gray infrastructure that we have overall across the city. So generally, if you have a healthier forest, the less stormwater infrastructure that you're going to need to build. And so consequently, we believe that there's a cost savings associated with the ability to maintain urban forestry and how that impacts stormwater moving forward keeps those costs lower, I think, overall. Back then, we had funded roughly the mix, I think, was between, roughly 60% general funded, 40% stormwater funded at that time. Primarily the reason why it was transitioned, I believe, from the general fund to urban forestry is because of that nexus, but also because we were going through the pandemic at the time. And so consequently, the goal as well was to potentially save some general fund dollars. And as we know, we're restricted to the 1% property tax cap. 50% of the general fund is funded by that property tax that we currently collect. And so consequently, if you do move this back into the general fund, there is a really intense pressure now on the general fund, and we would have to bring a forecast chart back to you showing what the impact is and how that might move the line up further, closer.
Councilor Cotton?
So as a follow-up to a comment you made prior to these comments, Director, you had commented that things would be getting a little close as far as the numbers and that you would be watching things, or everybody would be watching things very closely. Is this a decision, this aggressive scenario that the finance department is comfortable with?
It is. Yes, I think we've got the tools and we've got the staff in place to be able to monitor effectively. Cash flow is going to be really, really important. And we do know that things do change over time. So the assumptions that we built in this plan could certainly change. And we're a very adaptable organization internally, and as well as council's been adaptable too. So the more that we continuously monitor, as well as bring back data to council to share, I think the more that we can handle this plan as it's currently been presented to council.
Thank you.
Councilor Benson?
When we moved urban forestry and when we merged urban forestry and stormwater, did that increase the number of full-time employees that we had under that were being paid by these rates?
You have City Administrator Chambliss?
I'll take that one because I did it. You did 2 budgets ago. When you merged them, stormwater went vacant and was vacant for a period of 3 years, which is why you got to see the slides last year of the ponds out of control and everything. So as part of that, you did add 2 positions back into stormwater so that we could take care of that in-house.
And is that driving the increases that we're seeing in the rates?
I think it's a component of it, but I don't think it's all of it.
The major one's sewer. Sewer overwhelmingly is pushing the rates. I'll pull you a slide.
So what I'll just add to that is there's been a major focus, I think, on stormwater that's been increasing over time. So as a part of our MPDS permit, there's been some mandates, I think, as a part of that, such as water quality mandates that we have to meet generally overall. And then we've had the build-in projects, right, in order to demonstrate to the Department of Ecology that we're working on that water quality control that we need to accomplish through that permit itself. So that's part of the reason why you're seeing some of these stormwater increases that are coming through is because we've had to build in those projects. When you think about urban forestry as well, it's not just the forest that's behind the houses, it's also the street trees out in front. And we know through Snoqualmie Ridge 1 that we have lost a number of trees. Their lives have been shortened, I think, overall, and that we have to actually spend money to replace those trees because really we're seeking a canopy that can really benefit us from now, but also into the future as well.
Councilor Watton?
One other comment to just the risk, because we're going to the full bonding capacity based on the income coming in, and when that income is more heavily dependent on on a few large users. If those large users suddenly pull out of the city, it will impact our revenues coming in to repay. So we have to be really careful in how we price for the heavy commercial usage. We need to make sure that we're recouping the costs, but at the same time, the more it's dependent on heavy commercial users, and especially a small pool of them, the more risk there is. So just keep that in mind as we weigh that with multifamily. Multifamily is not going to go away. And we just need to find it where it's sustainable, equitable, and fair across. And I think just taking the extra steps to make sure that we price it right is very, very important to our future here in making sure that it's sustainable.
Counselor Johnson?
Then my last thought then with regard to the staffing that I brought up earlier, then perhaps we can keep it in our back pocket as a tool to use as needed. If it looks like the numbers aren't adding up in the enterprise funds, then shifting some FTE over that makes logical sense into the general fund. And the reason I suggest it again is that although it sounds like we're robbing Peter to pay Paul, we're really not. The revenue sources are completely different for those two buckets. So it just could be a tool, maybe not one that we need to exercise right now.
Point.
Any other comments or discussion?
Nice work.
Good job.
So I think there's a couple things. So one was mention of comparable comparison for individual classes. Is that something that we need 4 council members to agree? Is that something that we need, or are we satisfied with the information that we have that I believe is on residential? Councilor Benson?
I'm not sure that it would change the way I feel about our choices. But if that's information that somebody has to have, then
It sounds like it takes more research, though. We've already taxed them on all the research multiple times. Councilor Johnson?
Well, the same way, just in that it doesn't seem like it would give me a benefit that's worth the work that would have to be done. Not necessarily that I don't care to find those answers. It just, I don't think would move the needle enough to make it worth the effort.
Councilor Cotton?
I agree with Councilmembers Benson and Johnson. And I also, I'm not sure that, it sounds like there would be additional cost associated with all the previous research we've added on to this study. So it
Yes.
doesn't alter me making my decision right now either.
Okay. Councilor Watton?
I would not feel comfortable approving it as presented until we have all the facts.
Councilor Washington or Mayor Pro Tem Holloway, do you believe we need the information?
While he's thinking.
It's gonna be a while.
Well, and
don't hurt yourself.
I'm not sure in the context of the rate study itself, the level of detail you're talking about is actionable. I do look, there is opportunity even at either the residential or an aggregate rate that we might find benchmarks we want to go look at and say, hey, why is Leavenworth such a great rate have such great rates? What are they doing differently than we? But that's a follow-on activity, not necessarily focusing in on the rates themselves. We pretty much you have operational costs, you have capital costs, that drives, here's what you need to fund. You have a rate structure under which we've made determination of here's what it costs per ERU for each type of these categories of rates. And you divide it across and you move forward. Those don't necessarily change. We have decided how we're going to fund that. Discussion tonight was how we're going to fund that moving forward. Whether it's generational debt or whether we're going to, how far do we go into that? And at this stage, we're going to go to our policy limit, not our debt load limit. We can get more debt if we had to out in the market. But our policy limit, we're going to push it to actually try to spread that generational payment of that debt. So I'm not sure. I think maybe in an aggregate or at least the residential, that may give us enough information to see how we're doing compared to others. Going down to each individual classification, those classifications are situational to each city. They may or may not have those classifications. King County, as I said, King County just, an ERU costs you this much, no matter what. So may not get that comparison you're looking for. But I think at an aggregate or at least residential rate, we may get some follow-on actionable information from that. But I don't think the going lower would help us in making the decisions we need to do for the rate study.
Yeah, I think I would just add that I think it's good information to learn and to know, but I don't think it changes a strategic decision for me.
Okay.
Yeah, what he said. He did it much better.
Okay, so I guess at this point, we're not going to ask for the information then. The detail, right, going down into the individual classifications.
Can we put it on our list for next rate study?
We put it on the list for the next rate study. Duly noted. And then, so I guess the next step would be an ordinance, right? And so there's 3 different rate options you've been studying. Which one should they write the ordinance up for then?
Aggressive.
Yeah.
Aggressive?
I like the aggressive option.
I'm seeing lots of head nods for, I see many head, okay, so we write the ordinance up for the aggressive option.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions or discussion regarding this item? I think we've pretty much covered it. So thank you, Sergey. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's hot.
Okay.
Maybe, I don't know.
Is there anything else, any other report for Parks and Public Works?
Kat, anything?
No.
You were the chair last week, so.
Okay.
Nothing.
Thank you. Finance Administration Committee, we have a claims report dated February 24th, 2025. Mayor Pro Tem Holloway, would you please make the motion to approve the claims report?
Yeah, where it? I didn't see it.
I didn't see it. Oh, move to approve claims report dated February 24th, 2025. May I have a second?
Second.
Been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Holloway and second by Councilor Washington to approve the claims report. Is there public comment regarding this item? Seeing none, is there any discussion? Mayor Pro Tem Holloway?
Just why this is here. I was a committee of 1 last week, so I didn't feel comfortable putting the claims report on the consent agenda.
You're a good guy.
Per our process, though, I mean, I've reviewed it. I've got no questions. I've received no questions in email, which is a process we put in place some years ago. And do recommend approval of the claims report as presented tonight.
Right. Any other comments? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, nay? And the claims report is approved. Next item is mayor's report. So it's been busy. So first of all, the city administrator and I attended the North Bend City Council meeting last week, and we provided public comment. And he provided comment on regarding putting our police chief on administrative leave and just ensuring that there is a fair and impartial investigation. So we're not able to provide any information or details at this time. but we're confident that our Captain Horaci and the entire Snoqualmie Police Department will continue to provide the high levels of service North Bend and Snoqualmie residents expect and deserve. And then I spoke to, regarding police services agreement, that we are proud of the exceptional level of public safety that the Snoqualmie Police Department has provided to both North Bend and Snoqualmie residents for over a decade. And our top priority is coming to an agreement that is fair to the taxpayers of both cities and reflects the level of service required to keep our growing community safe. So that is just giving you an update. Next item is legislative update. Councilmember Christensen and I attended the Association of Washington City Action Days last week, and we heard speakers from the Office of Financial Management, the Attorney General, state auditor, lobbyists, and attended different sessions. We also met with the legislatures in the 5th and 12th districts, 5 of them in total, and we covered our council priorities, including community center funding, support to ensure the Youth Recreational Facilities Program grant, which is for the YMCA, that they were able to put the application in, and were confirmed that we would receive $1.2 million as long as it stays in the governor's budget. So we continue to ask for support for legislatures on that. We also spoke to State Route 18 funding for the final phase, and additional types of revenues available for cities, such as the state sales tax revenue sharing, looking at different options for that. So we covered all of those in about 10 to 15-minute meetings with 5 of them. So it was pretty quick.
Was there discussion of transfer of the parkway?
I did bring that up, and that is also listed on council priorities. So yes, we did. And this past weekend and today, there's a Twin Peaks events, and they calculated there's probably 400 to 500 people that attended. And I met several of them that have fans that have traveled from Ukraine, Belgium, Tahiti, and many other places from around the globe that came here just for this. So this was a great event for Snoqualmie Valley, as it brings in tourists during our shoulder season to our restaurants and to retail. And we'd like to thank the Real Twin Peaks Board who planned and hosted the events. So it was a great turnout. There are 2 climate planning workshops that will provide input for the climate element that will be added to the city's comprehensive plan. So the first workshop is in person on Thursday, this Thursday, February 27th, from 6 to 8 p.m. at City Hall Council Chambers. Pizza will be provided starting at 5:30. And then Thursday, March 6th, will be an online workshop from 7 to 8:30. And finally, Sound City Association networking event is on March 5th. So please let Deputy City Clerk Garrett know if you would like her to register you for it. So with that, are there any commission or committee liaison reports? Seeing none? Okay. So tonight we have several executive sessions. 3 executive sessions and 1 closed. And the first executive session pursuant to RCW 42.30.1101I, litigation with action to follow. That one lasting about, I think it's 15 now. 15 minutes. And those attending will be City Attorney Dina Burke, City Administrator Mike Chambliss, and HR Manager Kim Johnson. And so that one, we will be in for about 15 minutes, and then we will come out and we will have a motion there will be action following that one. Then we will go into the next several executive sessions, which are pursuant to RCW 42.30.1101G, to evaluate the qualifications of an applicant for public employment or to review the performance of a public employee with no action to follow, lasting about 10 minutes. And the same people will be attending that, our city attorney, city administrator, and HR manager. Then we would go into a closed session pursuant to RCW 42.30.140 for a collective bargaining session with employee organizations, including contract negotiations, grievance meetings, and discussions relating to the interpretation or application of the labor agreement. No action to follow on that, lasting about 10 minutes. And the same people will attend that, the closed session. And then finally, an executive session pursuant to RCW 42.30.1101I, litigation with no action to follow, and that will be lasting about 30 minutes. And those attending will include the City Attorney Dina Burke, City Administrator Mike Chambliss, Finance Director Drew Boutte, and Interim Chief Gary Haracy. And let's see, and following those, no action is anticipated following the conclusion of the closed and executive sessions. So council would adjourn directly from the executive and closed session and not return to open session. And the Deputy City Clerk will be informed of the concluding time, which will be reflected in the meeting minutes. So to start, City Council will take a 5-minute recess. Yes, we can do that. So we'll actually go upstairs for the first one. But we'll take a 5-minute recess and reconvene an executive session. I just do the first one, right? So in 20 minutes, so 5-minute break and then 15-minute executive session. So reconvene back at 9 p.m. And
Mayor, do we need the 5-minute break?
it'll take us 5 minutes to get up there.
Like a minute and a half.
Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, let's just go to executive session.
It'll take you 5 minutes to get there. So we'll
We have to shuffle
so
upstairs.
reconvene at 9 p.m. Okay, we're coming out of executive session. It is 9 p.m. And is there a motion?
Yeah, I'm trying to restructure it per what we said.
Council- Okay, Mayor Pro Tem Holloway.
All right.
Good, okay.
Move to approve separation agreement 1, dated this council meeting of 2/24/2025, separating a prior member of staff from city. May I have a second?
Second?
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Holloway and second by Councilor Washington for separation agreement as of dated today, February 24th, 2025. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. And it's unanimous, and that is approved. And is there another, we need to amend and motion? Councilor Johnson?
All right. And City Attorney can correct me if I get the reference incorrect on this. Move to approve the separation agreement dated February 20th, 2025.
We need to amend it
Point
first.
of order.
Can we, could you please do a motion to amend the agenda and
Oh,
add
that's
it?
amendment first. Okay. Move to amend the agenda to approve a separation agreement,
To add a
to
separation.
add in a separation agreement.
Second.
Moved by Councilor Johnson, second by Mayor Pro Tem Holloway to add in a separation agreement. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Looks like it's unanimously approved. Councilor Johnson.
Move to approve the separation agreement dated February 20th, 2025.
Second?
Been moved by Councilor Johnson, second by Councilor Washington. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And is unanimously approved. Thank you. So now we are going into additional executive session and also then our closed session. And we anticipate 50 minutes for all,
50?
50? 50
5-0.
minutes, 5-0. And so we would come back out at like 10 o'clock?
Start at 9:30.
9:50, just in case?
Let's say 9:50 and then we can always extend it. So we'll be coming back out at 9:50. And again, no action is anticipated. And so we will adjourn directly from the executive session and closed session and not return to open session. And our deputy city clerk will be informed of the concluding time, which will be reflected in the meeting minutes. But I do believe we do have an executive session link.
We do.
So if you can click on that, so we will go out of this public session and into our executive session link.
Do we have external attendees?
No, but we don't want to put it on the screen. Drew has
Okay.
a presentation.
Thank you.